topic for. Hello, I'm Beth Britton. I support Dementia Community with their communications work. Welcome and thank you for joining us for the first of our 2 March webinars. Before we get into the topic for today, I wanted to briefly explain a bit more about Dementia Community. Dementia Community is a charitable community benefit society and membership cooperative that provides learning and networking opportunities for the dementia care community. Dementia Community's core purpose is to connect and empower the dementia care community. Dementia Community's vision is of a world where all people within the dementia care community feel connected, informed, empowered and purposeful, and are actively engaged in co-producing changes that improve everyone's experiences of dementia in care and in wider society. To sum up, if you're aware of the work of the National Dementia Action Alliance before it was disbanded, we very much hope that Dementia Community is a replacement for the NDAA. Community members own a £1 community share in Dementia Community, and membership is open to everyone. So if you aren't already a member, do join us. There are both benefits and opportunities for all of our members. My colleague Beth Lang will put a link into the chat that will take you to our membership page, or please do scan the QR code that's on the screen. And if you're having any difficulties joining the community, do message myself or Beth Lang and we will aim to help. So on to the topic for today's webinar, Cognitive Stimulation Therapy, CST, for dementia. I will introduce you to our fabulous speaker shortly, but just some brief housekeeping first. We are recording this webinar, so if you don't want your face on the recording, please turn your camera off. Please use the chat for your questions. We will have a Q&A and discussion after the presentation, and we'll be keeping an eye on the chat. We hope to have some live participation too, so if you would like to ask your question yourself, please do raise your hand when we get to the Q&A. Afterwards, Beth Lang will email you with the slides. The recording will also go onto our YouTube channel, Journal of Dementia Care, so do look out for that. We'll also send you a feedback form afterwards, and we would be very grateful if you could fill this in. So let's get started. So our speaker for today is Emily Fisher, who is a research fellow and PhD student at University College London. Emily, welcome. Thank you, and over to you.
Lovely. So hi everyone, thanks very much for having me today, and thanks to Beth. I'll just share my screen and we can get started. So lovely, that should be showing up okay for everyone. So yes, I'm Emily Fisher. I'm a research fellow at UCL, and I'll be talking today about cognitive stimulation therapy, or CST. Quick overview of the talk. So I'll be giving an introduction to CST, covering the sessions and the key principles of cognitive stimulation therapy. Then I'll give some background about how CST was developed. I'll talk about how CST has been adapted more broadly, and then finish off by talking about how CST can be used. We've got a few polls to start us off. So Beth, I didn't know if you could bring those up.
Unfortunately, sorry, for some reason my polls aren't allowing me to do it.
No no problem.
Pop the answers in the chat.
Yeah, that's fine. Lovely. So yeah, I just first of all wanted to find out if anyone on the webinar has heard of CST before. So if you could just pop a yes or no in the chat, that would be great. I'll give you a couple of minutes to respond. Oh, lots of yeses. That's good. Okay, lovely. Mostly yeses coming in. That's great. And then, has anyone delivered CST before? And some yes and no's, a bit more of a mix. Lovely, that's great. So I'm hoping that for those of you who have delivered CST and know about CST, I can add some more knowledge to what you already know about and your experience. There's also opportunities to ask questions at the end. For those who haven't delivered CST, hopefully this gives you a bit more of an insight into what CST is and how you could apply it in your professional role or personally. So thank you everyone for answering. So let's start off. What is CST? So this will be a recap for some of you, but I'll keep it fairly brief. So CST is a brief group program for people with mild to moderate dementia. It aims to improve cognitive functioning using activities and techniques to exercise different cognitive skills. It's based on key principles, which I'll go through, and each session has a theme. And CST is guided by a manual. So it's a manualized intervention. Some key features of the CST program. So in general, it runs for 14 sessions, twice a week for 7 weeks. This can be as a post-diagnostic intervention or not immediately post-diagnosis. Each session's approximately 1 hour. Ideally, there's around 5 to 8 people in each group, and there might be 2 facilitators, ideally, but it's possible to run it with 1 facilitator. And in each session, there's a choice of different activities to cater to the interests and abilities of the group. Again, ideally, group members should be at similar stages of dementia so that the activities can be pitched accordingly. But as you'll see, there's lots of flexibility within the CST manual, and I'll go through that throughout the webinar. So what does a CST session look like? So at the start of a session, as I said, there might be 2 facilitators, there's up to 8 group members. You'd welcome the members, you would remind everyone of the group name, and that might be a name that the group themselves have come up with. You'll do a warm-up together. That might be throwing a ball around and ask each other questions about the week or your day. And some groups have a group song, which they either listen to or if they fancy a sing-along, they can join in with that. You then have a look at a newspaper or an online article to look at the date and then to choose a topic from the newspaper to talk about that current affair. Then there's a main activity which takes up the bulk of the session, and that's based on one of the themes, which I'll go through in a second. And then in some groups, you might suggest some activities for people to do at home if they want to, and you might also discuss the planning for the next session. So if you're asking participants to bring something along or to prepare something for the next session. That's not homework. I want to make that very clear. It's not giving people homework. So it's about preparing for the next session, and that's an optional choice for people. So let's have a look at the themes of the sessions. So there's 14 themes in cognitive stimulation therapy, 1 per session. I'm not going to go through all 14 today. I'll leave this slide up for a second to give you a chance to look over those. And I'll talk through about 6 of them in detail. I'm going to talk through the first 6 sessions and give you an example of the main activity that you would run based on that theme for the CST session. So firstly, looking at physical games, and we know that physical activity is really important in life generally, but also for people with dementia in terms of keeping active, keeping fit and healthy, and trying to maintain a level of physical activity. So I've got one example of a game here. You might play skittles or balls together. You could pair people up in teams. Depending on the group's ability, you could ask them to keep scores and do it as more of a competitive activity. And this is just one example. There's other examples in the manual, the CST manual. But really, it's about encouraging the group to to have fun and get active, and that could look like a range of different activities. So that's an activity for the first session, physical games. In the second session, the theme is sound. Lots of different activities, again, that you can run in the sound session. You could ask people to match noises to corresponding pictures. You could play different songs and ask people to identify the names of the songs or the singers. I could encourage a sing-along there, and you could also give people percussion instruments and ask them to play along. So that could also, this sound could also cover music as well. So that's the sound session. Session 3 is childhood theme. So, and this has a sort of reminiscence element to it. So you could invite people to, if we've got access to sort of old-fashioned childhood toys, or it's not even that old-fashioned, you know, these are quite dated now, so we're going back quite a few years, spinning tops, jacks and hoopla, but you know, any sorts of toys from the past, you could invite people to demonstrate how you would use those, or you could taste foods that remind people of their childhood, ask people to suggest some foods that they want to bring in. The next session is food. So you'll see there's a bit of overlap between the sessions as well, but they generally try and follow one main theme. So the sorts of activities you could run here are asking people to plan a meal on a budget. They could do that in teams, categorizing different types of food, preparing food, or if you've got the facilities, cooking food, or preparing food that might be seasonal. So there's some options for the food session. Current affairs. So this, you'll see that every session has an element of current affairs discussion, but in session 5, this is really expanding upon that. So discussing issues from recent newspapers or magazines, and holding a discussion on different topics, different current affairs. Obviously, you maybe don't always want to get too political or, you know, too heavy, but it's really up to the group and what they would want to discuss. If they want to discuss politics and have a debate, then that's really, yeah, you should encourage that. But there's just some options here. What do you think of today's fashion? Thinking about a default retirement age, asking people what they think about the royal family, and having a discussion around that. It could end up looking like a debate as well. So that's session 5, current affairs. And then session 6, this is the last one that I'll talk through in detail. So this is faces and scenes. This is where you can compare different photographs of famous people or famous scenes or local scenes to try and stimulate discussion. Some of the questions that you can ask might be looking at multiple pictures and asking, you know, what do these people have in common? How are they different? Who would you rather be? Who do you admire the most? And another nice activity is looking at local scenes. And if you have access to pictures from the past and modern and current pictures, sort of comparing what has changed, and that might stimulate some conversations, some memories from past and present. So those are sort of 6 of the sessions, and hopefully that's given you a bit of a taste of what the main activities might look like in the sessions. I'll now move on to talking about the key principles. I've sort of already alluded to a few of them, but these are the guiding principles of CST. That there's 18 of them, so it looks like quite a lot. You can see on the slide. You might not cover every single principle in every single session, but these are the sorts of things that you should be considering and be bearing in mind when you're planning CST activities or running the sessions. Some are very specific to CST, and some are sort of more broad and more general towards dementia care and support. So again, I won't go through all of them. You can see from the bottom row, actually, I'll highlight those: respect, choice, fun, person-centeredness, building and strengthening relationships. Those are all quite broad and general principles, which I think are good to apply in all walks of life, really. But yeah, I'll go through around 10 of these the principles from the top 2 rows. So the first principle, sort of what doing what we say on the tin for cognitive stimulation therapy. So it's mental stimulation. It's getting people's minds active and engaged. It's encouraging people to take part in activities, possibly activities that they might not do at home or in their daily life. But it's also about pitching the activities at the right level. So making sure that people have to make an effort and sort of challenge themselves slightly in the activities, but not pitching the activities too high so that someone feels de-skilled or thinks, oh, why am I bothering with this? I'm not, I can't do it. So it's about getting to know the group and their strengths and their preferences to be able to pitch the sessions at the right level. The second key principle is new ideas, thoughts, and associations. So often, and this is a generalization, but I think it's something to think about. So often with people with dementia, we might tend to talk about things from the past. We might, and there's absolutely a role for reminiscence therapy. But whilst it's enjoyable, and we know that it's a really great intervention for people with dementia. But what can happen is that people can recall information that's been over-rehearsed and have kind of set lines or set stories. So with this key principle, it's about continually encouraging new ideas and thoughts and associations rather than just recalling previously learned information. So an example from that faces and scenes session that I talked about is asking the kinds of questions when you're faced with a few different pictures of famous people, asking them what do they have in common, how are they different, who would you rather be, rather than saying who's this, or who can tell me who this person is, who can tell me who the Prime Minister is. It shouldn't really feel like a test. So yeah, using the prompts to encourage new thoughts, new ideas. The next principle is using orientation sensitively and implicitly. So what do we mean by this? So it's bringing people into the here and now. So trying to encourage people to think about where we are, what time of year are we in, what group are we in, what's the group name, and doing that implicitly. So not saying today is the whatever date we're on, 11th of March, and it's spring, and so you could use the reality orientation board. That might be something that you've come across, and on that you can include the name of the group, a reminder of the name of the group members. In terms of orienting people sensitively to the date, you could think about what props have you got around the room. So we're in March, you can put some daffodils. That could be a topic of conversation. Thinking about the sorts of questions you're asking. So do you think the weather is normal for March? Is it hotter and colder than usual? You can also carry out orientation through some of the key activities. So in the food session, thinking about having seasonal food. So, around different holidays and thinking about Easter coming up and things like that. So that's the third key principle. The next principle is opinions rather than facts. So people will often be wrong, but if you can ask someone for your opinions, they might be unusual, they might be controversial, they might be different to your opinion, but they won't necessarily be wrong. So it's about an example question here, asking people what they think of politicians, for example. What do you think of the royal family, rather than who is the prime minister, who is the king? And avoiding using questions beginning with who can remember. Again, it's not around testing people, it's around stimulating conversation and not putting people on the spot. The next key principle is using reminiscence as an aid to the here and now. So this is using reminiscence as a tool towards orienting people to today. And there's an overlap here between the new thoughts and associations, but it's not solely using reminiscence for reminiscence sake. It's kind of making comparisons between then and now. Some examples are comparing old and new scenes, comparing changing prices over time, comparing fashion trends, lots of different examples here. The sixth key principle is physical movement. Obviously, you've seen that we have the physical games theme. So the first session, the theme is physical games, but actually it's about bringing physical movement into every session. So encouraging movement, perhaps at the very beginning of every session, throwing a soft ball around, encouraging people to stand up, maybe have a stretch. And there's some of the sessions that it might fit well into in terms of the main activities. So the physical games, being creative, that could include something like gardening or standing up and doing some painting. The team games and quiz could also incorporate physical movement. Okay, and the seventh key principle is providing triggers to aid recall. So these can be multi-sensory cues, so thinking about the use of images, the use of sound, the use of smell, taste and touch to really support people with their discussion and their recall of information. Certainly having something to look at and pass around. That could be printouts, that could be different items to prompt discussion. That is a really important element of CST. Okay, and then the key principle 8 is continuity and consistency between sessions. So you'll have seen that one of the first slides I showed you was the breakdown of the session. So you're greeting the group in a similar way, talking about the group name, you've got the same group song, you're having a discussion about current affairs, and then moving on to the main activity, and then closing the session in the same way. So there's that continuity and consistency to provide that sort of optimal learning and supportive group environment. Ideally, you could run sessions in the same room. That's not always possible when we're sort of short of space or resources, but that's an ideal. Okay, and then the 9th key principle is implicit rather than explicit learning. So I talked about you're not giving people homework, and ideally people won't feel like they're in a school class. It should just be a fun group activity. Ideally people are making friends. It doesn't always need to be led by the group leader. If there's one of the participants who wants to lead an activity with support, that's really encouraged. And it's about kind of not putting people on the spot, avoiding asking direct questions, avoiding making people feel like they're being tested. Okay, the next principle is around stimulating language. And just by definition, CST sessions that are stimulating language, there's a lot of discussion, you're in a room together talking about things, talking about each other's days, getting to know each other. There's also some of the sessions are kind of explicitly based around language. So there's a word games theme. You can talk about naming people, naming objects, but language is a really key part of CST, and one of the areas that we know that there's an improvement following CST sessions as well. And then the final key principle that I'll talk about today is stimulating executive function. So executive function skills, so these are the skills involved in planning and organising, are often impaired due to dementia. So it's around trying to get people to use those skills with support pitched at the level that's right for them, and the sorts of activities that you can run that really tap into this. Anything where you're kind of following steps or where you're planning. So making a cake, looking at recipes in the food sessions, selecting food for a meal plan. We've got a session themed around orientation, so that could be planning a journey, thinking about how you'd get from one place to another. So yeah, those are some of the key principles. Hopefully that's got people thinking. There is more information online about the remaining 7 principles if you're interested. But what I'm going to do now is show you a short video. So this was, we've had a sort of whistle-stop tour of the CST sessions and principles. And this video was filmed at Age UK, so it's courtesy of an Age UK group in North Devon. I think it highlights some of those principles really nicely. So I'd encourage everyone to look out for, firstly, some of the session themes, and then secondly, some of the principles that I've covered. If you've got a pen to hand, you could jot them down, and I'd be really keen for people to share them in the chat. Once we've shown the video. So I've shared my sound, so please let me know if you can't hear it. Hopefully that's okay. Oops. Oh, sorry. I'll have another go.
Friendship, I would say, means someone that you could rely on, and somebody who enjoys your sense of humour.
It's a closeness. Friendship is nice.
Friends, you can do anything with them, say anything to them. It's nice to have people like that. I've been coming to the group since it first started. It must be 2 years, I suppose. Yeah, I think the group helps with my symptoms, and it was good fun.
We spring forwards and fall backwards. So what happened?
I find the stress that I might be experiencing disappears when I'm here. I enjoy it because, yes, it's things that you probably wouldn't do at home, and that's the part that I really enjoy.
I mean, I don't sing, I don't usually share anything with other people like this, and yet what's nice about the group is so accepting that you sing, no matter how badly. The whole group, they're very, very, very good. They've all got a good sense of humour, and they all seem to be happy people, and they're all very friendly. I think Vernon is the one that I get on best with, because he's got a lovely personality, a very kind, and he's got a lovely sense of humour.
Well, Ian He's good. Dry sense of humour, I think, you know what I mean. We sort of mix in together, you know. Doug, oh, he's nice. He's the closest friends in there. Good people to be with.
It's a very relaxed group, and people seem to be honest with the rest of the group. It certainly helps me, well, which is nice, you know. It's a good group.
Okay, lovely. So yeah, hopefully I'll just back to the start. Yeah, hopefully that highlighted some of the principles that I've talked about. And just before we move on to the next section, does anyone want to share in the chat anything that they noticed or anything that stood out to them from the video? Or did anyone notice any of the key principles or session themes in action? No, that's fine. Oh, lovely, thank you. Oh, there's some coming in now. So yeah, physical activity, creativity, connection and developing relationships. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing those. Yeah, physical activity again. So the social nature of the group. Yeah, Veronica, thank you. So that the evidence base highlights this as an important outcome. Definitely. Making people feel involved and emphasizing they're not alone, as dementia can be very isolating. Yes, exactly. I think that really came through. The kind of social nature, the supportive nature, the inclusive nature, Sally Ann said. Tyree, easy to notice the principles, but great to see the bonds they form with each other along their journey. Yeah, lovely, thank you. Yeah, so I'm hoping that has shown, you know, I think the video can highlight that better than I can in an hour-long webinar, just seeing the group in action. So I think that was helpful. So I'll now move on to talking about how CST was developed. So CST was developed over 20 years ago now as an evidence-based intervention. And it was developed through a review of the literature, a pilot study, and then a trial of effectiveness. And through this review, the reviews of the literature, you'll see elements of reality orientation and reminiscence therapy and person-centered care within CST. So it drew on different elements of all these theories and existing ways of working and interventions. The first trial, led by Amy Spector, included over 200 people living with dementia in care homes or in day centres, and led to improvements in cognition, so in memory, language and executive functioning, in quality of life, and that's as measured by the person with dementia and a proxy rater, so that might be a family member. And they found that CST had similar impacts on cognition as donepezil, so that's a medication that's used post-diagnostically for dementia. But this was one trial. This was 200 people, so not huge numbers, but all really promising. Since 2003, CST has gone international and has been developed in adapted for use in lots of different places around the world. The trials have been replicated and it's been tested in lots of different populations. And the good news is that it still holds up. So these findings do still hold up. So there was a recent review of effectiveness of cognitive stimulation for people with dementia. Now, it's an important distinction. So the original trial of CST was based on the 14-session CST manual, and it was a manualized intervention. This, the more recent review, took in studies of cognitive stimulation more generally. So it didn't have to be following the 14-session manual, we'll talk next about how CST has been adapted. So there were elements of different adaptations of CST, but also there have been similar programs developed that look a lot like CST and follow similar principles, but aren't the exact same 14-session program. So this review of different studies included 37 trials. Programs lasted from 4 weeks to 2 years. 16 of the 37 used the CST manual, and the data comes from 17 countries. And some of the key findings here are that, yes, cognitive stimulation leads to a small benefit in cognitive function, in the same way that we know that it did in the trial, and in the same way that donepezil does as well. There are also probable benefits, including improved well-being, improved mood, and improved effectiveness in day-to-day activities. However, there was a bit more uncertainty because there were lots of different types of CST being brought into one review. Lots of different types of cognitive stimulation and lots of different programs. So there was uncertainty, and the team highlighted that future studies need to assess how often CST should take place to have the best effect, and identify who benefits most from cognitive stimulation. But overall, it's a program where the effectiveness is held up over 20 years, and that's really, really promising. And I'm highlighting here some quotes from people with dementia. So this was from a study in 2011. I noticed people becoming more fluent. You could see people trying to express themselves more. That's highlighting the language element. It helped all of us to know that we were in the same boat. That's a sort of social and inclusive, supportive element. I can relax. We share the same problem. We all like coming, otherwise we wouldn't be here. So again, that's sort of the supportive group environment. There's also some quotes from family carers. So someone saying, there's no argument that my wife is brighter. He enjoyed being with people that he can relate to. The value of the group has been to make him more animated and motivated. See, this was from one study, but again, there was a review of different qualitative studies. So that's interviews asking people to feed back on their experiences of CST. This was a paper from 2020 where it pulled together lots of different findings from lots of different interviews, and it was these six key themes that came out. So there were benefits from the group environment, but there were also some challenges, and I think that's part of life, isn't it? And it's kind of part of kind of forming together as a group. The importance of companionship and getting to know others, that was definitely what some of you highlighted in the chat from the video. The togetherness and the shared identity. Group entertainment. So I think entertainment, that could be thinking about having fun together, doing things you wouldn't normally do together, making friends. The support of the group was really important, and also that by definition of being in a group, that brought a level of cognitive stimulation as well. So that's just highlighting some of the key experiences of people with dementia who've taken part in CST groups. Okay, so I've been talking about adaptations of CST. I've mentioned this a couple of times, so I'll now quickly cover some key adaptations of cognitive stimulation therapy. So I'll highlight 3 of them. One is maintenance CST, individual CST, and virtual CST. And I'll talk about some of the strengths and limitations of these approaches. So maintenance CST is a weekly 24-session program of CST. So anyone who has run groups, I've run lots of CST groups myself, and often at the end of the 7 weeks, people are saying, well, what's next? What's now? You know, are we going to carry on? Can we carry on? So maintenance CST was developed in response to this. There's another 10 additional themes for the sessions, and it's also been tested in the same way in trials. So a study from 2014 of a randomized control trial found that maintenance CST improved quality of life at 3 months and at 6 months, and activities of daily living after 3 months. The effects on cognition weren't quite as strong, and maybe that's what we'd expect over a longer period when people with dementia are taking part, where there is a trajectory that cognition will get worse over time. But what was promising was that the greatest improvements took place in the people who were taking part in MCST and taking medication. So there's definitely evidence for the benefits of continuing CST beyond the initial programme. And whilst people are willing and still able to, then it should be encouraged and continued. Okay, looking at virtual CST. So this, I'm sure, looks very familiar in our post-pandemic world. So virtual CST was actually developed initially in Hong Kong prior to the pandemic, but its development was really accelerated during the pandemic. And there was virtual delivery taking place in the UK, in the USA, New Zealand, Brazil, and India. And we found that it was manageable for people to take part in it. I think there was a question mark about whether it would be suitable and whether people would tolerate online sessions. But actually, it was something that brought a lot of light at a really difficult time for people when perhaps you weren't engaging. We were all locked down, so you weren't having the same level of socialization and support. So we've developed some guidelines for delivering CST virtually. Highlighted a few of them here. So having a co-facilitator, so someone to help manage the technology. Transforming the CST activities onto a PowerPoint presentation, also posting out a resource pack for people if that's possible, so they can have things to look at home. It can help to have step-by-step guidelines for technology. It can also help to have a carer at hand to support with the technology if needed, but actually we know that a lot of people with dementia have been able to manage the sessions fine themselves. Also allowing unstructured time to chat before and after the group sessions to try and encourage that more natural and natural time to kind of just chat and make friends and support each other outside of the CST session itself. And then finally, the final adaptation is individual cognitive stimulation therapy. This was originally trialled in 2017, well, in the sort of mid 2010s. It was a 75 session program delivered 3 times a week for 25 weeks, and it was to be delivered by a family carer, so a partner or a friend or an adult child or spouse, 3 times a week. Hearing that, you might think that seems like quite a lot, and there was a high dropout rate from this study, and there was also quite low uptake, so people on average received 33 of the 75 sessions, and there was quite low adherence to the manual. We know that it didn't have an impact on cognition and quality of life in the same way as a group session, but that might be because of the low uptake. We did find that CST improved the relationship between the person with dementia and their caregiver, and it did improve the caregiver quality of life. But we have, there's recently been a pilot study of a 14-session individual CST programme delivered by trainee psychologists. This took place in 2020 or just before 2020. And it showed promise, but the numbers are quite small there, so we can't be sure of the effects. But it showed that a larger study is warranted. So I think that's quite exciting. Okay, and just moving on now to the last few minutes of my presentation. So again, I've highlighted already some of the places where CST is used, but one thing I really want to highlight is that CST is recommended in the NICE guidelines in the UK for treatment and management of dementia. So CST is recommended to be offered for people living with mild to moderate dementia. Also highlighted in the guidelines are considering using reminiscence therapy and cognitive rehabilitation therapy. So a real focus on psychosocial interventions for dementia. We know, so because of this NICE recommendation, we know that CST is delivered in memory services. There was a survey of nearly 60 memory services, which showed that CST was delivered by a wide range of different disciplines. It was also delivered virtually through memory clinics during the pandemic. But these numbers are reducing slightly, so there's been a slight change in funding, I think, which means that fewer services are now offering CST. But CST is being delivered by charities like Age UK. It can also be delivered in settings like day centre, hospitals and residential homes. So it can be adapted for lots of different settings. It's also been adapted for use internationally in at least 38 countries. And I can share a link to the UCL website that gives a bit more information about the different projects that are going on internationally. And it was highlighted in the World Alzheimer's Report as something which should be scaled up internationally, because it's low cost, it's quite low resource, it can be delivered by non-specialists, so it really fits well with international scale up. Okay, and then finally, you can access CST manuals and training. So there's manuals available online that go through all the different sessions. There's a link there. They're also available to download. As I've highlighted, they can be picked up by non-specialists, and anyone can pick up the manual and deliver CST. It does help to have had experience of working with people with dementia. It might have helped to have experience of running a group before. But you don't need to be an assistant psychologist. You don't need to be a clinical psychologist. So I think that's a real strength of the programme. And the manual is flexible, and the sessions can be adapted to meet the needs and preferences of the groups. Training is available through, there's a link to the International CST Centre here that highlights, that provides links to where training is available. It's really important to note you don't have to attend training to deliver CST. I'm not here to plug UCL's training programme, but people might find it's helpful to attend a session. You can pick up a manual and run sessions. If there's someone at your workplace who's already delivering CST, you could shadow their sessions and co-facilitate before you start delivering sessions yourself. The same goes for the individual CST. That's something that you can pick up and deliver at home. I just wanted to highlight the training and the manuals so that you were aware of them. So finally, to summarise, sorry, I've run slightly over, but just to summarise that CST was originally developed as a 7-week group intervention. It's been adapted for longer term use, for individual, virtual and international use. Throughout that process, there's been perhaps some impact on elements of the effectiveness and some more uncertainty in terms of who's CST working for and what's the right format and what's the right dose. But we know that the strength of the evidence has held up over time, despite different adaptations. And CST can be delivered in a range of settings by a range of people. So that's where I'll finish and say thank you very much for listening. And I think we've got about 10 minutes for questions. So I can stop sharing and we can have a chat together.
Oh, that's fabulous, Emily. Thank you so much. Really, really enjoyed your presentation. Learning more about CST was just fabulous. I hope everyone who's joined us this afternoon has enjoyed that as well. I've got a raft of questions, including the fact that you've stimulated my memory because I didn't know who one of your pictures was. So I might get to mine in a minute, but let me see if anyone else has got any. So I think we might have one or two in the chat. So while you were speaking, Kate asked, small benefit, what does this mean in practice?
Yeah, thank you, Kate. That's a good question. And yeah, that was quite unspecific of me. So in practice, it means a few points on a scale, something like the MMSE, so the mini mental state examination. So that's a cognitive screen, and it can improve the outcome on something like the MMSE by a few points. So that's the sort of quantifiable nature of it. Hopefully that answers your question, but I will also want to highlight the kind of lived experience of people who've taken part in the sessions. So those quotes that I highlighted, people saying that, yes, I can see that my partner's brighter, I can see that they're more motivated to take part. So there's things that are a bit more difficult to measure, but in terms of the cognitive outcomes, it's a few points on a scale, which is equivalent to the changes that come about when someone takes donepezil for dementia. So we're not talking about game-changing outcomes here, but we're talking about slowing the progression and having a small impact.
Thank you, Emily. I think it's so interesting what you said about, you looked at the benefits that have been found through research of CST, but actually your film highlighted the friendships, the stuff that goes on when the sessions end, the way that people will keep in touch with each other. And I think that is just such a huge, amazing benefit. Veronica has said, I'm interested in developing a group-based CST on a dementia ward. Couldn't do the whole program, but I think there are some principles and activities that could be adapted. Any thoughts?
Yeah, really interesting. Yeah, thank you, Veronica. So, yeah, I mean, it's a flexible manual. I highlighted those 18 key principles. You might not be able to run structured 1 hour sessions 1 day a week for 7 weeks, but if there's some activities that you can bring into other aspects of care, if you can use some of those principles, then I think I think can only encourage that. I think that's one of the strengths that we've seen of CST being delivered in an international context, that actually the in healthcare settings which are sort of less developed, sorry, I've just seen some questions coming in, so I'm getting distracted. So in healthcare settings where the systems are less developed and there aren't lots of different post-diagnostic support services for CST, actually CST being tested has helped to inform principles of post-diagnostic care. So I think it's really interesting. I think, we couldn't say for sure that it would have the same impact, but I think it's not a bad thing at all. So
I think the takeaway message is give it a try, see how you get on, isn't it?
Yeah.
Richard's asking, does CST work equally well internationally and educationally?
Interesting. That's a really good question. And hi, Richard, I recognise you. Nice to see you. Yeah, so that's testing my memory, actually. That's testing my my knowledge of all the different trials. What I can say is that the trials have, the impact of the trials is sort of held up internationally. So in different settings, we've seen that sort of impact on cognition and quality of life has been replicated. There's possibly an argument, so I'm thinking specifically of a trial that was done in Tanzania. It was a smaller scale trial, so there's more uncertainty around the size of the effect, and that's really important. But there was actually a much bigger effect size than we expected. And that's possibly because it was being compared to the treatment as usual, which in rural northern Tanzania wasn't very much, and there was a very limited awareness around dementia. There was a lot of stigma around dementia. So by adapting and trialing CST, it had a knock-on effect on the carers, who were then learning a lot more about dementia, and it was helping them know how to sort of helping their interactions and their understanding of dementia as well. So hopefully that answers your question, Richard.
Super, thank you, Emily. Stephanie says, do you use any specific pre and post evaluation to measure changes for the group?
Yeah, I think this is something that this question comes up a lot. So I mentioned the MMSE, which is the mini mental state examination. There's also the MOCA, which is quite a short, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. These are the two that would be sort of recommended in routine practice. You'll see in the research we use the ADAS-COG, the Addenbrook's cognitive assessment, if I'm remembering it correctly. That takes quite a long time. So I think that, in routine practice, if you've got an outcome that's taking sort of, 20 minutes per participant, and that's a one-to-one outcome measure, then that time will add up. But the MMSE and the MOCA are both quite short. So those are the two which are recommended. There's also measures of quality of life, which I can't think of off the top of my head. Oh, and I've just seen Veronica's recommended the mini ACE, which is very short. So yeah, I think there's definitely outcome measures that can be used, but I just encourage short and low, kind of low burden outcome measures.
Thank you, Emily. So Kate says, I was concerned about the structured nature and how inclusive this approach would be for a group that had people from very different cultural and educational backgrounds. It's really interesting in the film, you had just a group of gentlemen in that film. So you recommend that people should be quite specifically grouped based on what Kate's saying? Are you actually saying no?
Yeah, really good question, and a really good really good to notice. So no, I don't. I think that's just by chance that was a group of male participants, and if you go on the Age UK YouTube channel, and they've just done a load more filming of lots of different groups. So it's really interesting to see the different groups. That's just one that I really like. So that's why I use that one. Yeah, I think that's one of the strengths and benefits, strengths and limitations of the structured program. So because it's structured, it means that it can be picked up and delivered, and that has an impact on fidelity to the intervention, and it's scalable. But it's also about really getting to know the group, making adaptations yourself. If the people here are going to be running groups, don't be afraid of sticking to the principles and sticking to the kind of core elements of activities, but changing them to suit the group. There have also been some formal adaptations lots of formal adaptations of CST following a framework for cultural adaptation, which involves lots of stakeholders and lots of kind of co-design principles. So those can be picked up and used. They're not always as readily available as the manuals. They're sometimes hidden on academic journals behind paywalls, but it does show that it can be adapted. And it's really about getting to know that group and kind of putting the time in to adapt sessions to suit them. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and we've had a couple of we've had Stephanie come in the chat and say, I imagine it could be adapted, then you could incorporate music from other cultures, lots of learning involved then. Obviously you could have different food, you could do lots of different sort of things in that way, couldn't you? And Kate, I think, has left a fabulous question because we're out of time. She says, is an hour ever enough? Is it ever enough for a CST session? Is it ever enough for a dementia community webinar? Because we're pretty much out of time. Is an hour enough, Emily? These things must go on sometimes.
Yeah, they can. Yeah, and there's, you know, that it's recommended now, but if there's a resource, if there's time and resource, you know, you can have a break, you can have lunch, it can be fit into a wider day of activities. Yeah, I think an hour is recommended, and that's what the evidence is based on. That kind of 7 weeks, 2 times a week for 1 hour. But if there's resource there for it to go on longer and to kind of be built into a service, then I think that's a good thing. So
fabulous. Right, so into the chat. So thank you very much, Beth Lang. Please complete our evaluation. That's really important because that's really helpful for our learning. Stefan is saying many thanks for the information. I will most certainly be making recommendations to community groups to run these.
Great.
Sally Ann says we run our group in an hour and a half weekly for 14 weeks.
Okay, great. Yeah.
A couple of people say thank you as well, that it was a really useful session. We're out of time, Emily. It's been fabulous. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Having you. And you can find out about our next webinar now. That's what I need to tell you about. So into the chat as well. My colleague Beth has put the information. So our next webinar is on the 26th of March, which is Tuesday. It's Understanding Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. Fabulous topic based on some of the questions we've just been answering as well. So that the booking for that is live. It's on our website and you can access that from the link in the chat. So thank you all so much for joining us. A particular thank you again to Emily for such a fabulous informative session. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon on a Dementia Community webinar.